Hey there, all my fellow aviators. Thank you very much for tuning in. In today's video, we're going to talk to you about the methods that I learned to carve the fastest and least expensive path to not only your private pilot certificate, but also through your instrument and your commercial as well. So if you haven't watched one of my videos before, you might be wondering, well, who's this guy and why the hell should I be listening to him? And that's because I'm probably the world record holder for doing this in 91 days. So starting in May of 2023, in 91 days, I went from a guy with a Canadian private pilot's license through to a guy with a FAA private instrument, multi-commercial, CFI, CFII, and MEI. And then I launched my independent flight instructor business. About halfway through that business, I received a job offer from a commercial airline. I was at my 1,500 hours within 12 months. So now I was 15 months into it. And then I started my training with the airline at 23 months. But then I hit a little snag. I got grounded. I got diagnosed with blood cancer. I'm now cured, but that's why I have no hair. And so I'm on the road to recovery now, and I hope to be back in the air sometime in 9 to 12 months from now. But that doesn't mean I can't use what I learned along my journey to help you, as I've already helped thousands of other pilots to learn how to do this in a much more efficient way than seems obvious at first glance. So let's dive into this. The goal here for my viewer is you are very likely not just looking for a private pilot certificate. If you're watching this video, you are very likely looking to go all the way to CFI so you can get paid to fly and then ultimately become an airline pilot. If you're later in life, that works as well. I started at 53. I got hired by the airline at 55, so pretty late in the game by conventional wisdom. But at 55, aside the cancer thing aside, I still had 10 years of flying ahead of me. So now I'm going to have 9-ish years ahead of me once I get back in the skies. So if you're a little older and you're not happy with what you're doing now, don't let that discourage you from watching this video. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about budget. So what's this going to cost? And more importantly, how should you go through it? What should you do? Should you be saving as you're doing it, or paying as you go, or what have you? So budget, if you do this the way I did this, you're going to be looking at somewhere around $12,000. And what I strongly encourage everyone to do is to not start your training until you have your $12,000. Now, why do I say that? Well, the reason is simple. The more often that you fly, and to do this quickly, you're going to need to fly pretty much every day. I generally flew 5 to 6 days a week. The less you will forget, and the faster you will become proficient. So overall, you will spend a lot less money versus a student who's flying 2 days a week, and then they're kind of forgetting some stuff that week, and then they got to relearn it the next week. And it just drags on, and it drags on, and it drags on. And it can become frustrating and discouraging. And overall, it's going to cost you a lot more money because you're going to have to relearn a bunch of stuff that you forgot. So just like joining the military, when you go to your first flight school, it's a blitz. And I encourage that you look at this as a blitz as well. So the next thing that we need to talk about is the flight school. Now, the flight school that you choose is going to have a huge impact on your ability to do the things that I'm talking about in this particular video. So first of all, there's 2 types of flight schools. We've got your Part 61 flight school and your Part 141 flight school. I'm going to be really blunt, and I'm going to say for the private pilot certificate in particular, I strongly do not recommend Part 141. And that is because although it looks like you could do it faster because you need less hours, in reality, thanks to stage checks, thanks to lots of students having to share one airplane and that airplane frequently breaking down, and thanks to incredibly conservative minimums that cause a high number of your flights to be canceled, you will not finish faster in a Part 141 school. There might be an exception out there. I think in all of the years that I've been filming content, I heard a comment from one person who had a really good experience with Part 141. But by and all, unless you can't find the money any other way and you need to get the loan, don't go Part 141. Instead, what I recommend is that you work with an independent CFI at a flying club, or just an independent CFI like I was, who I went out and made deals with aircraft owners, so I had airplanes to fly for my students. And that independent CFI, if they're training full-time students, the maximum they can handle is 4. That's all I could train at one time. So that means you're not really sharing the aircraft with that many other people. And also, you've probably got an aircraft owner, like I did, who's really keen on keeping his plane flying. And so he makes sure that the 100-hour inspections are done on the off hours so that the downtime or flights lost to maintenance are virtually non-existent. So if you need help finding an independent CFI, I do work with a fellow who runs a nationwide network of independent CFIs, and there will be a link down in the description to a page on my website that you can go to, and you can read all about the details of how to get paired up with an independent CFI. Generally speaking, independent CFIs are a little less expensive. They are far more adaptable in their schedules, and I think that overall you're just going to have a much better experience. So in terms of your prerequisites, you're going to need a total of 40 hours, and 20 of those hours must be with an instructor. During those 20 hours with the instructor, you're going to get 3 hours of cross-country training, 3 hours of night training, 3 hours of instrument training, and 3 flight hours for test prep. So that's the requirements. The other thing is you have to be at least 17 years old to obtain a private pilot certificate. Now, let's talk about weather, because next to your flight school, weather is going to have the single greatest impact on your ability to get this done in the timeline that I'm talking about. So depending upon when you're watching this video, you may want to go to a different place than where you live or where you're planning. So for example, I trained in Ohio in the summer, and there was one point when I was, of my 91-day sprint, I was stuck on the ground for 3 weeks to just thunderstorm waves after thunderstorm waves after thunderstorm waves. So not ideal. So if you're in the summertime, be very mindful of being in a place that has a high level of humidity and a lot of thunderstorms, because you're going to lose a lot of flight time to those thunderstorms. Same goes for the winter. If you're in a place that does not get a lot of sunshine, you're going to lose a lot of days to low ceilings and clouds and mist and so forth in the winter. So if you're someone who's later in life and you have the ability to relocate, which I strongly recommend that you do, because you're only looking at relocating for about a month if you do this correctly, make sure you go to a place, for example, like Boise, Idaho, where I'm from. Boise is the perfect climate for training. 300 days of sunshine, very few thunderstorms. So there's only about 2 months in the winter when our flying time gets cut in half due to low clouds with ice in them. Other really great places are the Sun Belt down in the southern Arizona or in areas of California. During the winter, Texas, Florida can be really great. The Carolinas can be good. Again, I'm not as familiar with those climates, so you'll want to do your homework. But if you are in an area that is not in any of those, chances are you're going to significantly extend your timeline, and you've got living accommodation to pay for, and that means that's going to drive up those costs. So I would encourage you to relocate to the optimum place for weather. Now let's talk about aircraft. So in the first phase of the private pilot certificate, in the pre-solo phase, it really doesn't matter what you fly. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need any fancy avionics because really all you're working on is your stick and rudder skills. But once you have soloed and you're getting close to doing your cross countries, if possible, I would recommend that you start flying a plane with autopilot. Why is that? Well, because most of your career you're going to fly planes with autopilots, and if you don't learn how to use an autopilot early on, it's going to be a challenge for you later on. And when you're doing your instrument flying in particular, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how instrument and private pilot kind of cross over each other, you're going to have a much harder and more stressful time flying in IMC if you don't have an autopilot. So this isn't an absolute mandatory, but if you have a CFI or a small school or a flight club that has aircraft that are a little older, fly those first, and then move into something with some glass and an autopilot a little bit later on. Now, the next thing with respect to aircraft is you want to make sure that the place that you are renting from has, ideally they have in-house maintenance, because the aircraft needs these 100-hour inspections and they happen pretty often. And so you want to minimize the time lost for that. Or in the case of what I did, I had an owner whose plane I was using. I had exclusive access to it for my 4 students. And he knew he liked that plane flying because it made him money. And it made him good money every time it was flying. So he always had a deal with a local A&P who would do the maintenance on the off hours, usually like Wednesday at 3 o'clock or something. So I'd skip my 3rd flight on Wednesdays so the plane could go into the shop and get the 100 hours. So make sure that you understand how the maintenance is being done on the aircraft that you're going to be using. Now let's talk about DPEs. So DPEs can really slow you down because there is a nationwide shortage of them. But it's not always a problem. So in my case, the school that I attended was Part 61. They had in-house maintenance, and they had 5 or 6 DPEs that were always around. And by the way, please don't ask me for the name of the school because they do not like to train private pilots and they have a very long waiting list, and I won't give it to you because the owner asked me to stop giving it out because he keeps getting calls from people that he doesn't want to talk to. Anyway, you're going to want to make sure that if you can't have relatively easy access to a DPE, then you employ some clever strategies to minimize your wait time between check rides. So what do I mean by that? So for example, you're going to come to a phase in your private pilot certificate when you are soloing and you're doing cross countries. And now you've got maybe a 3-week wait for your check ride. So rather than stop flying, the smart thing to do is start chipping away at the hours you need for your instrument rating, because the prerequisites there are you need to have 50 hours of cross-country solo time flying. And so you can go away and chip away at those hours. And if you want to cut some or save some money while you're doing that, take a safety pilot along with you so you can split the costs 50-50. But you're going to want to make sure that you can keep on flying while you're waiting for that private pilot check ride. And then if you're doing this really smart, you're going to schedule all 3 of those check rides at one time, because you can actually make it through quite quickly using the methods that I'm explaining in this particular video. The other advantage of doing your check rides back to back to back like I did is that when you're studying the ground school, you're going to forget so much less. The longer you have between your check rides, the more you're going to forget, and that means more studying, and that means more delays. In my case, for example, the last 2 weeks of my flight school, I had 4 different check rides. It's totally doable. It sounds like a challenge that's too big, but trust me, it's not. If you're studying and you know the information, going out and flying one day and another one the next day is completely doable. Okay, what's next here? So now let's talk about selecting a CFI. So I would encourage that you do 2 or 3 discovery flights with 2 or 3 CFIs, because you're going to be needing to find someone who has both a written syllabus, they believe in using a written syllabus and can show it to you, and someone whose teaching style matches your learning style. In other words, you have chemistry with them. And you might have an okay fit on your first discovery flight, but if you don't do more than one discovery flight, you're really never going to know if you're having your best fit or not. So make sure you spend a little extra money and make sure that you're flying with an instructor that you have good rapport with. So what's next now? Okay, let's talk about that curriculum. So for your private pilot certificate, generally speaking, it looks like this. You're going to learn your maneuvers. You're going to do your first solo. You're going to fly under the foggles to get those cross-country hours. You're going to get, the instrument hours. You're going to do some night flying. You're going to do some cross-country flying. And when you get to the cross-country flying, if you have, like I mentioned earlier, if you have it available to you, an aircraft that has autopilot, you're going to really make your life a whole lot easier. And I think you'll be a safer pilot, because rather than constantly being focused on flying straight and level, you can put it on autopilot and let the computer do what is otherwise not the most exciting task. And you can focus on looking at your checks and looking at your fuel and looking at your oil and pay attention to the radio and looking out the window and really making sure that you're not in harm's way. All right, now we've got exams. This is sometimes confusing for people, so let me break it down for you. First of all, you have a written exam. It's a multiple choice exam with 60 questions for the private pilot certificate. If you're well prepared for it, it's probably only going to take you half an hour. And in the case of the private pilot, unlike instrument and commercial, where you can rely on Shepherd Air's software to help you get ready for the written exam, you're going to be simultaneously studying for the written exam and also at the same time for your oral exam, which is half of the check ride. The other half of the check ride is the flight exam. And so for that, I recommend that you go to my website and you'll see there's a ground school page there. I've got some special deals on some recommended online ground school software and how you can get some extra free stuff to help you along. And make sure that you are taking your studying seriously. And it's something that you absolutely can get a jump on if you're in the saving up phase. Because as I mentioned earlier in the video, if you don't have the money yet to start flying, there's no reason in the world why you can't study and go knock out that multiple choice written exam, and I highly recommend that you do that. Okay, where are we at? Oh, and there's, as far as the study techniques, there's something called the ACS. And I've got another video that I'll link down in the description because I want you to go watch that video. It's about how I used the ACS to prepare myself for the instrument check ride. And it was a technique that I used on all of my pilot certificates. So don't worry that the video is about instrument. It applies to all of the certificates that you're going to want to earn on your journey towards CFI. Now, how do you get extra practice? Well, Microsoft Flight Simulator is an absolutely phenomenal tool. It's very affordable relative to flying a real airplane rather. And you can practice as much as you want. If you want to learn how to use a G1000, it's ideal. There's a Cessna 172 in there with a G1000, and it's pretty much an exact replica of the real world G1000, and I used it a lot. So when I got into the real plane, the G1000, it's kind of complicated. There's a lot of buttons on it and a lot of knobs, and you got to sort of know your way around. And if you practice on Microsoft Flight Simulator, you are definitely going to know your way around. As I mentioned earlier on, anytime you're doing cross-country, if you want to cut your budget as much as possible, find another private pilot to fly with you who's qualified to be your safety pilot. You can, if you want to, put those foggles on. That's how you use a safety pilot, is to fly with foggles on. So you can log even more time under the foggles, which will be good for your logbook, and it will also be good for your pocketbook. And then when it comes time to become a CFI, I do have another separate video on that. So what I've given you in this video should be enough to arm you to get through your first 3 certificates, your private, your instrument, and your commercial, because the process is more or less the same for the other 2. The requirements are just a little bit different. But then it's time to get paid to fly, and that's a great day when you get to stop paying for flights. And becoming an independent CFI, I think, is the smartest way to do it. You'll make 3 times the amount of money that you would make if you're working for a flight school. You don't have to go get a job. All you have to do is have some entrepreneur hustle to be able to get students for yourself and to find aircraft to fly. I have a training program that shows you exactly how to do that. So I'll put a link to that down in the description as well. So that's it. We did it in just about 21 minutes. Thank you very much for watching to the end. I hope that you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please do leave those right down below in the comments, because I do read every comment. And if it's a question, you can expect a reply from me. If it's just a comment saying, hey, thanks very much, I'm most likely just going to hit the thumbs up or the heart, because I get so many comments. Sometimes it gets hard to keep up with them all. So that's it. We're flying with Trent, and we're going to get you to the airlines faster and less expensive than you would have thought possible. Take care, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.